Hey Legionnaires, Omega Edge here and welcome back to another video. So, as promised, today we're going to be talking about the Blood Angels, the 9th Legion. So sit back, relax and get ready to learn how to paint this beautiful chapter. Now, for those of you who've been following me for some time, you would have noticed that I've been using lots of art references to help support my work. I really like the way that this artist, Colin McNeil, has been using stipples in his work to create atmosphere and also develop texture. Now, when I started painting these new types of miniatures, I didn't actually intend to create texture or give it a bad look. It's just something that seemed to happen after painting this way. And when I look at Colin's work, I think it's pretty clear to see all the different colours that he's added, all the different nuances, and just very closely placed next to each other. And when you look at the image from a distance, it kind of blends in. So that's the kind of idea that I brought into the way I would be painting. And I'm going to show you guys just how it looks like in this image. So when we look at the size of the Emperor and the Salamander here, you can kind of see that style, and these are one of the earlier marines that I'd been practicing on for some time. And you can see where there's all these little stipples to create that texture and how it relates to the image I showed you before. Now, when I look at Mikel Selva's work and the way that he paints, I really like the colour and the vibrancy that he uses in his reds. And it's kind of something that I've been wanting to play with for quite some time. Blood Angels are quite an interesting chapter, even though I felt like I've never had the courage to attempt them myself. I feel like Mikel kind of shows you how you can use different types of red to create a different feeling. In this image, you can see how there's pretty much no highlights. The brightest colour is the red itself, and then it kind of gets darker. Now, red can be quite a tricky colour for people to approach because often they end up making a pink or orange red. But in this time, I wanted to play with the different colour temperatures just to kind of show you that there's different ways to paint. Again, another image from Mikel, this time using colder reds to kind of bring those ideas across. And you can see that there's a bit of a blue light and atmosphere. This is the kind of ideas that I wanted to bring into the palette that I'd be working for in my own Space Marine. Right, so when we're painting red, one thing that we need to make sure we're careful of is ensuring that the volume that we're painting is mostly made up of red. That is to ensure that we're not using more of pink or orange. If we do too much of either of those, it stops being red and becomes an orange, a different tone of orange or a different tone of pink. Instead, what we can do is use red as our main highlight and shade down. Now, that's not to say that we can't use a little bit of those colors in our highlights, but the amount that we're using has to be really small. Otherwise, it will stop being red. This is something that requires a little bit of practice, and hopefully as we get onto the model itself, it will be a bit more for you guys to understand and to use as an example. Now, the last thing I'm going to say about the Blood Angel before we start painting it is the fact that this painting style that you've seen me adopt in recent weeks is what I call concept painting, and it kind of came from the idea of feeling pressured to completely finish a model to a really high standard. I realized that when I'm looking at artists, they all have sketchbooks and I don't, so we can sometimes feel pressured that we need to finish a model to completion. And in this tutorial, this style is about expressiveness and just playing around, and that's kind of how I developed where I've got to now. So you'll notice that certain areas are a lot less polished than others, or haven't even received a full painting or been painted at all. But the point of this exercise is to get you practicing and just seeing if you actually enjoy painting this way. And as you go, you'll start to see and develop a better idea and understanding of your own style. So hopefully this starts to make more sense, and the references that I've kind of shown you will also help you. But the point is, in this style, it's not about creating a super high level display model. It's about having fun, but also practicing different techniques. And today, it's all about crispness, color, and temperature. So let's get onto it. And also, just before I forget, I am running a class in the UK for at Cryptic Cabin. These guys are really lovely, and they've invited me down to host a class on how to paint my Space Marines in both acrylic and oils. So if you'd want some hand holding and some support and some time with me, feel free to send me a message, grab a ticket and come down. All right, let's get on to the model. Okay, so the first thing I've started with is I've got a mixture of colors on my palette. I've got a purple from Acrylics, a red, I've also got a AK wine red, and most of these colors will be listed below, so don't worry if I miss something. But the main thing I do is I start actually just stippling, and I've got a large dry brush. Now this is something I just started playing around with. I actually stole this this idea with the larger brush from Richard Gray, because I saw him doing it on one of his Space Marines, and so I can't take credit for it, but I did start playing with the idea of trying to give this kind of textured brush look, and like you can see the brush I'm using is very flayed. I start with purple underneath because what this is going to be is my undertone, and an undertone or underpainting actually affects the colors you put underneath. So by putting this deep magenta-y purpley color underneath, it will actually affect the type of red we get above. Now you can kind of see just by the way I'm holding the model where our highlights are actually going to live on the model, and that's just coming down from my lamp above. So you can see I start applying that onto the model, but each time I'm getting progressively lighter. So I've stepped up from the deeper shadow color, and now I'm just using pure red from Acrylics. And I really love this color because it's super opaque and super vibrant as well. But what's cool is that you can start to see this kind of stippled and stippled look. And what I really love about this style is the gaps it leaves, the gaps in the texture. It doesn't look like just one flat surface. It's got a little bit of nuance to it already, and you could probably paint an entire army in this way. It would be very, very quick, and I think it would look pretty cool. But as I'm stepping up on the model, I'm getting progressively brighter in the type of red I'm using. So remember what I said about not using other colors in the highlights? You can do that, but initially you want to start with a very broad painting, a very broad stroke. So you can see me just covering lots of large areas first, and then as we get on to developing the painting, developing the model, we'll use smaller strokes. So the red I'm using, that red, that's just, I think in Acrylics it's literally just called red. It's the brightest I'll go for this first pass, and you can see the difference that's making. Like, I've not edited the video at all, it's just that vibrant. Now what I like about Acrylics again is how fast they dry. So they're very useful for instances like this. And you can see me again with the brush. I mean, look at those brush, look at those look at the brush itself. It's the strands of the brush are completely like demolished, but it's perfect for a technique like this because it covers a larger area, and you can see where the kind of focus is, where the red is, and you might even be able to stop there. The key thing though is understanding where to kind of stop depending on how high up the model you are. Towards the bottom of the model will be dark and desaturated, and we really want a lot of the color and vibrancy to live in those higher areas. You can see that I'm getting progressively smaller. Now here I'm using a flesh tone color. The name escapes me, so I'll put it in the strand below so you guys can have a look. And you can see I'm only using that in the brightest and the highest areas. Now it takes up such a small volume that the armor will still read as red. I'm not doing it everywhere, I'm just doing it in the spaces where I want those highlights to live. And because it's such a very small nuance, remember I'm not using it pure, by the way, I've just mixed it in to the red highlight so that it just becomes a slightly lighter tone of that red, a lighter vibrancy of the red. So you can see here as I start just stippling to that area at the top, it's very, very simple, but I really think it's very effective actually. It just kind of gives you the look we're looking for. And as I do that, I can start playing around with other areas. Now the shoulder pad is a sphere that goes into a cylinder. Now this is actually quite tricky for me, and a good friend and teacher of mine, Lucas, miniature art on Instagram, amazing artist, kind of explained those volumes to me and has helped me quite a lot. So here you can see the effect it's had. So once I've done that red, we actually move on to the helmet, and I'm starting with a burnt umber and a dark ochre mixture. And this is going to be for the yellow, because the marine I'm using this for is an assault marine, or a blood angel from the assault company. I think they have yellow helmets, right? So this is what I was playing around with. You can also see that I've just painted in the black of the shoulder pads. That's just using black paint, nothing super extra about there. And I've just added in a little bit of grey volumes to the raised areas. It's important that you actually do the shoulder pads first, like the inner color, so the red first, and then you can do the banding afterwards, following the volumes that you've already laid the foundation for. And this might be a little bit clearer for the helmet because I'm using a thinner brush. This is like an absolutely mert size one from Winsor & Newton, which has seen better days. But I'm playing with different tones. Again, just stippling. Now, we are going to go over this in oil paint, but if you decided you wanted to just do this in acrylic, you could probably just stop when you feel comfortable to stop here, really. You can just add in a little bit more of the yellow, and then you could just paint the red, paint the chest, and I'd probably say that this is like done. Like, it's super quick. But if you want to take it further, then you have to get gradually smaller, and I think that's actually the key to painting in this style, is painting gradually smaller. So you start with the very large strokes and then you get smaller. The volume I'm kind of painting to make sure that it doesn't become gold, it needs to read as yellow, is by making sure that the volumes are quite large, that the yellow takes up quite a substantial amount of space. But I think it's actually quite nice to have some of those other tones in there too, some of the kind of like orangey tones that we've got from mixing the yellow into the ochre and the brown there. And you can see that I'm just like constantly moving the paint around. Now, heads up, for this miniature I'm not going to paint the back, I'm literally just going to paint the front. It's all repeatable anyway, so once I've shown you how to paint the front, you'll be able to paint the back pretty easily too, so I wouldn't worry too much. But you can already see how the yellow there is developing, and what I did is add in a little bit of a highlight to the helmet, just so I know where to put my oils when I come in afterwards. Now, the cool thing here is using the color of the light. So in the black, what I did is I took some of the burnt umber mixture I'd made before, and I'd mixed in a little bit of the yellow and then ice yellow into it to kind of create this lighter tone. And here you can see me on the red. I start dabbing in that mixture a little bit, just a little bit in the highlights where I want that to live, and it ends up becoming this really kind of nice, like warmer red, but only because the red around it is still, well, just pure red. It's okay, it still reads as red. And for the black and grey, we're kind of just copying the same color temperature. We're using that warmer yellow again in our black, and that's what gives it these highlights that you can see. So the grey will actually start to kind of turn into black as well. And here I'm just blocking in the eyes just to make sure I have a nice area to work with when I come onto the oil paints. You can see this is actually not a bad area to stop, just like be neat, blocking those spaces, and you can probably use a smaller brush too. So now I'm just going to go back onto the rest of the helmet. I'm just blocking in. There's actually a lot of red mixed into the black, and then I brighten it with a little bit of the ochre and the ice yellow mixture into my black as well. And you can see me start adding that into the highlight. Again, this is just a sketch, so we're just marking in the earlier volumes first before we move on to the other areas. And what that does is it gives the idea of atmosphere, it creates the effect of atmosphere, which allows us to really kind of ground the model. Alright, the fun part now, on to the oil paints. From left to right, I've got Turner's yellow, I've got burnt umber, or actually brown oxide. I've got yellow Naples light. I've got Opera Rose from Micron Harding, Cad Green Red Light and Cad Green Red Medium, Alizarin Crimson, Windsor Purple, and then a few other colours on there that will be removed a bit later, and Indian Yellow, because those were from a previous project, actually from the Dark Angel that I was painting earlier. And I think that oils can be very tricky and scary for people. I think they look at oils and are like, oh my gosh, what is this medium? I don't want to work with oils. I just want to focus on acrylics. But I would say that they're so friendly to use once you understand what you're doing. They're so kind and friendly to use. That black had actually been there for quite some time and ended up being kind of dried and thick, so I do end up scrubbing it away because it's not really suitable for the kind of paint I want to do. But you can actually see on the screen just how vibrant that red is, just how much it pops, and this is actually what we're going to use for painting the rest of the armor. And when I paint, I like to create a gradient in the colors, so I like to have them side by side. So for example, the yellow here, as I make that mixture, I'll mix it with a little bit of the yellow Naples light, and then in between I'll add in some Indian yellow, and the Indian yellow is what gives it that vibrancy. Transparent paints in oils are very, very good for improving intensity, whereas the opaque are great for coverage. You can use both, you can mix them into each other to kind of change the intensity, but you don't have to. It just depends on what exactly you're after. Here, for example, though, you can see me just mixing in a little bit of the burnt umber into my mixture, and I'm just using pure white spirit. There's no mediums included in this time. It's all just using white spirit, which will actually matte out the armor. It will stop it from being super glossy when it dries, so I really like using it. I'm using a little bit of the purple there also to kind of lower the value and help me kind of keep things in tandem. But yeah, you can see that the black is just not doing what I kind of want it to do, so I do end up scrubbing and removing it away in a second. So the reason for that is because if you leave your oil paint out overnight for a couple of nights, depending on how fast it dries, it will start to kind of dry on the palette, and you'll start to get thick flakes in it, rather than it moving kind of like loose like you can see it is now. It becomes very clumpy, so I prefer not to use it. I've got a little bit of Portland Grey Warm from Gamblin, and I start mixing that into my little mixture as well. This is going to be for the black sections of the armor. So yeah, very, very useful for things like this to add color and chroma into your black. So once I'm happy and the model is kind of settled and I'm happy with the colors, I make a wash, and this is different from the prime glaze, guys, because we're not going to paint over this straight away. What this wash does of the oil, I've actually mixed down a little bit of black and dark cyan purple, and I want to make sure that that's actually dry before I begin painting on top of it, because we need this paint to go into all the crevices and dark areas. So once it's done and you can see that we've added a little bit of definition, we can start painting. So what I do is I take a little bit of the darker shade of my red, so that is the Cad Green Red Medium, or Cad Green Red Deep in this case, and a little tiny bit of thinner. When you see my brush go off screen, it's because I'm dipping it into the thinner. And I start making these little marks. Now, the thinner you can get this, the better, but it's important to have it thin but remain opaque. Now, the reason we paint in acrylics first is because the acrylics kind of do some of the heavy lifting. It allows us to paint over an area without removing any of the color. So this allows us to kind of just go over an area and start painting straight away, and we don't have to worry about like the next layer having to let it dry. Every single time I'm just like kind of painting or adding my brush strokes, you can see the marks I'm making are kind of building up into these volumes, and once that's dried, I'll be able to kind of come back to it straight away. So it's actually really nice. It just takes about a couple minutes to dry in working this way, and by that time I've moved on to another area of the model before coming back. So I think some people really struggle to layer with oils. They struggle to kind of paint on top of an area. By keeping your paint really thin, you'll be able to layer on top of it. If you really want like a kind of breakdown of this kind of basic information, I would recommend checking out my fundamentals video, which will be linked above, or having taken a look at the Crimson Fist tutorial series that I did, which is available on YouTube as well for free. So I'm going to be kind of going over a lot of things that you guys might already know or may not know, but feel free to kind of go into those videos if you really want a full breakdown of how oil paints work. But for those of you who do use oil paints, or maybe you're just watching this to learn the acrylics, we're just stippling. We're just taking a tiny bit of paint and we're just stipping on top of the areas that we want to use. Now, what's quite cool, at least in this case about oil paints, is that I don't really have to keep going into the paint to layer, only if I'm changing color. There's actually a lot of longevity that we get out of this tiny piece of oil paint, and it just kind of moves so freely around the model. And you can see me kind of stippling and working up. I start with the leg actually, guys, because I find it easier and it's not like a really important area. If it goes wrong, you can quite easily fix it. So I kind of like starting with this area. It's also very low down, and also one reason to start with the legs is because if you kind of got it in mind that this will be the darkest area that you need to work in, everything else can get gradually brighter as you move up. So for example here you can see that what I was doing is quickly just cleaning my brush and then adding a little bit more thinner to it, and you can see how quickly we're able to layer on top of that, and also just how intense the red is, just how much like it's actually doing, and how much it's actually being able to kind of work up. So yeah, obviously this is a little bit of sped up footage, so it might be a bit tricky, but like yeah, this whole all in all, this probably took me about an hour and a half to work through just the front of the model and to do all the details that I needed to do. So once I'm happy with the leg, I actually start moving up towards the rest of the model, and now I've kind of worked my way towards the knee. And as I'm going up across the model, there are certain colors that are reserved depending on the area. So towards the bottom, I'll be working in my darker shades of red, and then as I get to the higher areas, I'll just be working with pure red. So that's the kind of midway point, the knee and abdomen upwards towards probably like the base or the base of the chest, and then above that I'll start using some of the even lighter tones of the red, so mixing in a little bit of the yellow Naples light, white or light I think it's called, which is very similar to an ice yellow. I'll reserve those for really just the highest points of the model. You can see that I'm just kind of stippling my paint. The consistency of this is actually quite thin, but I'm gradually getting a tiny bit thicker each time I want to layer on top. Otherwise the oil paint just won't take to it, it won't stay put, it will kind of just rub itself away. So the less thinner you can use, the better, but just including even a tiny bit of it will ensure that the paint is given optimal amount of time to dry. Now for the shoulder pad, it's very similar. It's a very similar idea. You can see that I've kind of followed up now with the red that I was doing on the knee pad, and now I'm just adding a tiny bit more of the kind of lighter red, and I've just mixed in a little bit of the ochre rose into my red, and this gives it a super vibrant color. You can also see that I've just started adding in a tiny bit of the alizarin crimson and purple into the shadows, and this just helps break up the color. You can see that I've pretty much left the back black because I'm just not going to go into it, just going to keep it as it is here, but this will kind of give you an idea of like how to kind of work around as well. Maybe later on I'll paint the back of the model, but this just for this tutorial purposes I won't. Now something I've noticed when looking at the model, especially in this position, is that you'll notice that one side is very smoothed out and the other side is a lot more rough, and I actually quite like the roughness to it. So eventually when the oil begins to dry, it will start to take that look, but it will just keep the vibrance. And that's the kind of crazy thing about oil paints, is that they stay explosively vibrant. They really maintain their color. Whereas when an acrylic dries, it starts to fade. An oil paint will maintain the look of it itself for, well, until it, like, I don't know, just forever. It's kind of crazy. They look exactly the same as they did when I first applied onto them. Now, you'll notice there that I added in a tiny bit of a white dot, and now I've kind of started to add in a little bit of a salmon color. So what I did is I mixed the yellow ochre, the Naples yellow white or light, and the Cad Green Red Light, and mixed it into a tiny ratio, very small amount, and that's what kind of become my highlight color. But I'll do something kind of mind-boggling a little bit later. It might be confusing for you guys, but you'll see. I'll explain it as I get onto it in the next part of the tutorial, where we start playing with opposing colors to kind of sell atmosphere. And there you can see that this tapping motion just really allows us to layer on top very easily. The cool thing about this is that we are blending at the same time. We're not blending because we're trying to smooth an area out. Just naturally as we apply, this is like oil paint's version of layering. So we're applying a layer on top, and then as we're applying it, we're actually blending with the adjacent areas. So now you'll start to see me mix in a tiny bit of the purple with the kind of grayish, pinkish grayish color we've got there, and a tiny bit of the ochre rose, and then I added in a tiny bit of black just to desaturate it, to stop it from being super vibrant, and just started to make a tiny bit of a mixture. And this is where now we start to create that sense of atmosphere. So we've got red, we've got all these different types of red on our armor, but I think this is kind of plain and boring at the moment. So what we can do is that we can just start playing with additional colors. And this is the part that kind of boggles people's minds when I say I've started adding in these different colors into it. But this is the sort of thing that will really push your painting and help you understand color. It's just by experimenting. So you can see I've added in a desaturated purple. Now red and purple are very close together on the color wheel. You'll actually see them as we start to transition into blue. We get to a red violet, then a blue violet, then a purple, but before moving over into blue, or vice versa. So this is why, like, the color just works, because the purple completes the wheel for us. It's important when you're painting a miniature or you're painting in general to try and use all three sides of the color wheel if possible, in some way. So whether that's using green for certain areas, you're still using a bit of blue, because blue and yellow make green, and by using a tiny bit of this purple color, we are using blue. We're adding blue to our palette, and this will just help people look at your model and feel nicer about it. And this is where the kind of nuance comes in, because I don't use it everywhere. I kind of keep it in select areas, but when I do use it, it's got a purpose. And you'll see that occasionally I end up using it as like a highlight or as a mid-tone, especially on the backpack and on the chainsword arm. It will kind of piece it together. But when we get into the corners and someone looks at it, they'll be able to see it just a little bit more nuance to the armor and a little bit more color to it as well. So here you can actually see that I've mixed in a little bit more of that grey color into our armor, and I was kind of umming and ahhing about doing it this way, but you can see that I've started to dab in just a little bit of those violet lights, just kind of wisteria color, lilac color into just the different highlights of the armor. And this is gradually thicker as well, which is why it's allowing us to kind of paint on top of an area much more easily. But you can see, for example, just here how I'm able to get into certain areas and just add in the gun. Unfortunately, it's just like kind of blocking the view, but you can see how I'm able to get on the shoulder, at least those little purple lights and tones. But again, the oil is blending it, so it's actually softening the transition, so it's not so invasive. But I think that would actually be like the main takeaway about this style is to stop like taking a dry brush and blending that way. Instead, just let your brush speak for you. And that's a weird thing to say, but what I mean is that with every time you apply onto the model, you're going to softly blend the model out anyway. So when we blend purposefully, we can create some really nice effects, but if we blend everywhere, then we're kind of just decimating the work that we did previously. So it's also very, very important to have restraint when blending, to make sure you keep the volumes and the areas in the way that you had in your head, or if you're following a reference, the way that's kind of shown in a reference. So from here on, literally, it's actually quite chill. You can see as I'm just applying on a few more textures and a few more colors, I'm getting progressively brighter. And it's kind of like you're kind of that tug and pull of, push and pull rather, of like playing with where you're going to put certain colors and how they fit next to each other. So for example, here I'm getting slightly warmer. I've added in a tiny bit of yellow into my red to kind of create this like very, very faint orangey color. But because there's still so many areas of pure red next to it, and then again you've got the area of the kind of purpley rosy color next to it too, you kind of create these areas where your eyes struggle to adjust and understand okay, the different nuances until you actually look at it deep for a longer time. And that allows you to make things appear as if they are red, or appear if they are a certain color, even if they're not, even if you're using these different colors next to them. And I've always tried to do this. I think actually playing with Alpha Legion for so long, where they have those really nuanced shifts from green to purples to reds to blues and cyans, has been really, really helpful with experimenting and understanding exactly how I want something to look. So yeah, playing with all these different colors next to each other. In fact, I started adding in a little bit of lilac into the highlights now, and then I'm going to go in again later and add in a little bit of orange into there too. And you just create these kind of like sandwiches. Actually, it's really color sandwiches. It's really strange, but it does create this really nice effect. And remember to, it's all about value. You're working up in different values. You're making sure you're keeping your brightest areas towards the top of the model. And if you look again at the leg, we've kind of not come back to it since the initial color placement. And all the areas that should be receiving light are, and we're just making sure that they all kind of coincide and are next to each other. So hopefully, yeah, this is making sense, and you guys are feeling like you're actually learning some stuff. Now, I did realize that the angle might be a bit off just because of where the camera is in relation to where I'm looking. I have to remind myself to kind of turn the camera. It is still very tricky to film on camera. Now here I start highlighting with the lilac color, and you can start to see it's still super red, but it has all these different effects coming on as well. So using that lilac actually cools down the edges, and then if we wanted to, we could go in with a little bit of an orange or a pastel yellow on top of the lilac or just next to it, to create these different effects and nuances. It's just about getting confident with playing with the color. I know that's a question I get a lot, is like, how do I know what colors go next to each other? Well, just check on your palette. Do those colors look nice together? If so, put them on the model. that's kind of how my brain kind of works and how I think about it. Now here you can start to see me playing with the grey on the chest, and we're just using the same colours that we'd matched on to with the acrylic. That's the Portland grey with a tiny bit of black and a tiny bit of yellow ochre to create this kind of cold, warm grey colour. And I'm not really aiming to do anything metallic, so I'm just kind of keeping things quite light and plain where they're supposed to be. The chest is actually a cylinder, so that means that the light will be focused towards the middle, and you can kind of just work your way towards the edges. You can actually see that I thinned out the paint a little bit just to help it kind of flow a little bit better. And again, that was just using white spirit. You can see just on the edges here, just getting into all those kind of crevices. You can see the kind of marks I'm making on the metal as well. This is just keeping the volumes kind of contained and making sure they're all kind of working in the same area. It's tricky. Like, I feel like this area is probably one of the hardest things to get right. It requires a lot of time, and again, this exercise I did in an hour, so I'm not expecting anyone to kind of go crazy for this. But when we come onto like our display miniature, when we've decided which squad we want to take to MPO, or for diorama, for example, we will be using the same kind of technique, and we'll have to go in very focused and a lot slower. I'm probably going to start that project closer to November, so it'll be interesting to share that with you and show you guys on my Patreon of what we're doing. But here it's important to kind of keep a general color. You can work on like slightly darker values as you fade out towards the sides of the cylinder, but towards the center, yeah, you want it to be slightly brighter and a little bit more of an area. But now we can start to see that it's like a kind of like metallic, dark metal, and look how quickly and easily that kind of blends together just by softly dry brushing over the area. Look, this starts to blend almost perfect. Yeah, really likes that. And then we can get a bit brighter as well, if we really want to. So I actually highlight the black using the exact same color, and I go around the kind of edges of it, and you can see me start kind of working on to the kind of like highlight areas. I've added a tiny bit more ochre to create this really yellow effect, and you can start to see how that black shoulder, the trim really starts to kind of fit in. You can stipple, so keep it kind of like thick in terms of consistency, and then you'll be able to stipple along the edges, and that will kind of give the armor the effect that it's that it's beaten metal. You can see here on the chest, something I've started playing with on the rims is, rather than highlighting up to that color or layering to that color, I actually start with a bright value in that area first and then shade down around it. You can also layer up as it starts to dry, but this way it kind of ensures that you're not having to go back over the area again and again, and build up texture. Again, we want to keep our layers of paint super thin. We're not trying to build up any physical texture. Everything you do should be painted texture from this moment on. So yeah, you're trying to kind of keep things very smooth. And it's actually interesting to see at the back of the legs, like where we started with the red and how we've ended up where we've got. And yeah, just playing with those, and you can see me, I'm just doing a bit of a trim highlight, so working with all of the areas on the edges and just start stippling in between there to kind of fade things out. And now it's starting to look super red, isn't it? It's like really like a deep red, but we've also got all of those nuanced colors in there too. So yeah, it just kind of helps it all add in, come alive and add in together. Okay, so I think you guys get the idea with the red. Now let's start working on the helmet. So the same idea as we were doing with the red this time we're just working in an even smaller area. Now the face is probably the most important part of the model. If it looks bad, the whole model, I think, just gets brought down. So it's quite important to work on that area and just be very gentle. Now, interestingly, as we work like this, we kind of start by adding in the mid-tone of the yellow rather than going to the brightest area. Now, again, I probably should have started bright first and worked around it, but it's just something, it's like a habit I have to kind of tell myself to work through. But I was also kind of discovering to see if I actually liked the yellow that I'd be using here. So here, for example, you start to see me stippling and just marking into all those areas. Now, the big part about painting faces, again, or helmets rather, is definition. So as long as the elements that we're painting on are quite separated, and the detail is maintained, we'll have an easier time. And before actually painting the helmet, I did do a little wash of Indian yellow and the brown oxide, just to get into all the crevices first. And now you can start to see as it kind of brings in how yellow that helmet is. But again, of course, we need to work around it and start bringing in all the shades. So the acrylic sketch is really like a map, and then when we come into using the oil paint, we are actually just kind of copying the idea, copying the same idea. So you can see here, as I get like really close, we're able to kind of like see just exactly where those nuances of color are coming in. So there's a little bit of the orange here, but we're going to start actually like covering up a lot of those little areas. Now the secret with yellow is it's actually one of the slowest drying pigments. By adding in a tiny bit of thinner, we're actually removing a little bit of that property. We're actually reducing how long it takes to dry. So you can also use things like liquid, but liquid ends up drying very glossy, so I try to stay away from that currently these days. Is just using a little bit of the Sansador or the White Spirit, depending on what you have, to decrease that drying time. And you can see especially on the forehead of the helmet there, I started gradually adding in a little bit more light, just to kind of give it the sense of where the light's coming from. And that light on the forehead needs to match up with the kind of mohawk thing, the communication mohawk on the top of the head. And you can also add a little rim light around the base of the what's it called, of the eye lens as well, just to bring in a little bit more focus as well. But this has actually been really helpful for kind of giving our character a little bit more attention. So everything else is red, and then you've got this beautiful bright yellow helmet to kind of draw your eye and attention to. So once we're done with the helmet and the armor, I start just by working on the plasma rifle, or plasma pistol thingamajiggy, whatever it's called. It's got a new name now since it went to 8th edition. I've completely forgotten what it's called, but you can see here I start playing with a little bit of the purple mixture. Now this wasn't nearly as vibrant as I needed it to be, so I do end up going in with a little bit of the pure rose in order to bring back some saturation and really give it the kind of hot plasma effect. And we could have made this like a cyan blue, but I didn't want to distract from the rest of the armor. We've already got the beautiful beautiful yellow helmet there, so there's no point then adding in a blue light as well. So just to distract, we kind of want things to kind of be pulled up, so your head kind of goes from the helmet to the gun, and then to the chainsword once we're kind of done with it, as well, to kind of give it a bit more character. But you can see here how like we're really beginning to kind of get that color, and then I go in for like the pure opera rose just to give it some extra saturation. That's the one thing I'd say about oils actually in this context, is that yeah, we need some fluorescent oil colors. I'm pretty sure the opera rose is that, but it needs to go over white. So next time I do this, I think I'll have to paint white first, just to give it a bit more of a believable effect. And I start to do the same thing with the chainsword. Now, I did do a little bit of a mess up here where I went on far too thick. Look how opaque that grey is. But it does end up becoming quite nice because I start glazing, well, not glazing, I start kind of blending over it. And here I start just messing around with different colors, different tones, all tones that I've already used on the model itself. But what this allows me to do is just kind of create this effect, and just makes it a little bit more interesting as well. You can see like I'm just quickly using some basic brush strokes and trying to kind of create the idea. Now unfortunately in the photo I took, you really can't see the effect on the chainsword, but it is there. So hopefully if you're watching this video you can actually see what the completed model would look like as well. So now that the main part of the model is done, you can just start working on the edge highlights, and there's a couple of edge highlights that I needed to add in that I kind of just forgot to do, but you can see that it starts to kind of bring in the crispness. And it's funny because I'm using a little bit of the magenta-y purpley lilac color that I added to create those highlights. And what this does is that it really kind of focuses the eyes to those areas. So you can see I've used it on the forearm of the chainsaw blade. And once I'm done with that, and you can probably do a lot more, I start working on the eyes. Now, I would recommend doing your eyes in acrylic first, because I absolutely flopped this. I also used like not best colors. Instead I use the kind of like limey yellow, which is just Cad Green Pale, and Cad Emerald. Now I'd recommend using a deeper color, like a kind of forest green, or mixing your own and then making this color the highlight. But I just don't think it kind of really works. And also it wasn't super neat. So at the end you'll see some close-ups of this model, and I do end up fixing a lot of that because I kind of reviewed it. I was like, ugh, that does not look good. But something I was experimenting with was first painting the light color and then painting the darker color next to it. And this was just to take advantage of the fact that, well, you can blend everything. And I think it was okay at first, but I just went a bit too far. Like, I always get the right eye, so the character's right eye, messed up. The left eye is always goes well, probably because of the angle it's at, but the right eye always struggles. So I even tried to add in a little bit of shadow using the Windsor yellow, which is a Windsor violet, which is a transparent paint, but it kind of just it doesn't kind of get the effect I wanted. So I do end up having to kind of go back over it again later. But eyes I find really tricky to paint on camera anyway, so you guys are gonna have to forgive me. I know that quite a few like painters and artists struggle with eyes on camera, and for me this is just one of those cases. So as we get into the last parts of this tutorial, I just want to reiterate that like it is just an exercise for learning. Obviously this is like not the main way to paint Blood Angels, but it's just my way. So I do hope you like it, I hope you found it useful, and I really look forward to seeing you guys again in another video. And for those of you who are on the Patreon, get ready for next week, because we're going to be painting the Blood Ravens. And if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps me and it helps the channel get more attention. And also, if you'd like to support me a little bit more, there's a link to my Patreon channel below. Thank you to all my loyal patrons. You've been with me for over a year and you make this possible. Bless you, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.